Hey everyone, welcome to the December 5th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we are looking back at this past weekend in racing, focusing primarily on just two venues this week, Aqueduct and Del Mar. Aqueduct, of course, the site of the Grade 2 Cigar Mile Day card on Saturday. Some wet weather in the New York area. I think we're pretty used to that at this point. So some wet conditions and probably messing up the track profile a little bit. We'll talk about that and its impact on a few of the stakes races on that Cigar Mile Day as we go through those New York Stakes events. But we'll also talk about some racing from Del Mar in the second half of the podcast. They ran a couple of Grade 1 races this past weekend, the Hollywood Derby and the Matriarch, as well as some other stakes on those Saturday and Sunday cards out in California. So we'll talk about both races, both racing days on the East and West coasts. And that's pretty much it this week, Craig, as the racing calendar definitely slowing down a little bit starting this week and probably through the end of the year until we get to that Malibu card just before New Year's Day.
Yeah, we had a case of more quality over quantity this week, but I do think there's some really good races to talk about and some interesting discussion as to how these races are going to be for handicappers going forward, particularly at Aqueduct.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something we look forward to every year, seeing some of these horses that are going to stay in training next year and having them end their seasons on a positive note. And I think we saw that with a number of runners that ran at least at Aqueduct on Saturday. Let's dive into that Saturday action, beginning with the feature race, the Grade 2 Cigar Mile. Large field signed on for this one. We talked about how competitive it looked on the Pacecast or the forecast last week, and a little surprising to have such a decisive result here, Craig, with Hoist the Gold winning by over 4 lengths, but so much of that was due to the way that the track had been playing on Saturday. I think we kind of knew how things were likely to go by the time we got to the last race of the day, just not exactly sure who was going to get that front running rail riding trip. And John Velasquez was aggressive from the outside with Hoist the Gold getting from post 11 all the way over to the inside, was able to set a pretty honest pace, but not a pace that was so fast that it took its toll on the horse, and he just opened up and they couldn't reel him in.
Yeah, kudos to Johnny Velasquez for just being aggressive, knowing how the track was playing from an outside post and taking advantage of it. And yeah, I won't know what to make of this race going forward, but it was certainly the right move on the day. I should mention this day is one that we have coded in bright red as highly speed favoring. I think that was probably more due to the inside being good. And of course, most speed horses are able to get position on the inside, but he was able to take full advantage of it. And we saw a race from him we haven't really seen before. He wound up with a 128 TimeformUS speed figure. Not sure how much utility that has going forward, but it was certainly the right call on the day.
It is one of those days, and we should talk a little bit about that track bias that was so evident on Saturday. Whether it was more the rail or speed, it's kind of hard to tell. On these sloppy tracks, a lot of riders just end up trying to avoid being right down on the inside, although I think those that did go down there ultimately, especially when they were able to stay out of the kickback, were rewarded. So it definitely felt like the inside was the place to be. It also felt like horses that were trying to make big runs were a little up against it, but pace also matters quite a bit in these situations, Craig. And we did see a couple of fast pace situations where closers were able to do well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The pace of this Cigar Mile, though, I was a little bit surprised to see Hoist the Gold get such an even pace figure line really right across. I mean, from a 124 up to a 128 final time fig, just really a flat line there. And, you know, you look at the raw fractions, 22 and 2, 44 and 4, feels fast, but the final time was fast. So, I mean, this horse just kind of ran them off their feet every step of the way. But watching back the race, I feel like I have to give more credit than I initially did to Senor Buscador for making the run that he did to finish so clearly in second over 4 lengths ahead of the rest of the field, because this was not a race that completely fell apart, obviously, given how the winner was able to achieve his victory. But Senor Buscador made quite a run from last to be able to get up to such a decisive second place finish.
He was impressive. I mean, he wasn't just last. He was kind of just way back there. good yeah, he really finished off the race. He was wide. It was just way too much to do. I was watching as a fan of his and really hoping the rider, Junior Alvarado, would just try to stay inside and work out a trip without losing ground, but it didn't seem like he was going to be able to do that. It was just too bunched up of a field, and he did what he could. So I thought he ran a good second. I did want to talk about those pace figures a little bit. Because I saw some people mention on Twitter, how do you handle the bias versus the pace? And one thing that happens at TimeformUS on days like this is the bias kind of gets baked into the pace figures a little bit, whereas everybody was kind of going hard and running fast early to try to get position. So when we make a pace variant for these races, it tends to be a little higher than normal. So the pace figures get cut back a little bit. It's kind of a really tricky situation. So I wouldn't argue with anybody that told me Hoist the Gold did set a fast pace, but we kind of toned that down a little bit due to the way that the track played all day long.
Yeah, I mean, it's a situation where horses are able to go fast and then finish off their races. So, I mean, relative to the final time, the pace wasn't that fast for Hoist the Gold because he kept going, was able to finish off the race with plenty of energy, whereas others who were up close chasing him off the rail, they faded much worse. So, I mean, if Hoist the Gold wasn't in the race, maybe the pace figures would look a little different. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Craig. I mean, we might be talking about how this race completely fell apart if Hoist the Gold wasn't in there. But then again, if Hoist the Gold wasn't in there, maybe a different horse would have gotten that advantageous trip on the front end. So it's one of those tricky situations where the winner, and such a decisive winner, kind of messes with the pace figures for the race a little bit. I still think Senor Buscador ran really well, and I think you'll agree with that, just given the way this race flowed and having to go so wide to make his run, and then able to find some extra, even in the last eighth of a mile, to put distance between himself and the rest of the field. Really nice effort from him. Not too much to say about those that finish in behind, other than you want to go back and watch a lot of these races from Aqueduct on Saturday, because I think there are going to be horses that lost by double-digit margins that you might want to give an excuse to moving forward.
Yeah, the other thing about this race, I would say, is Hoist the Gold was obviously coming out of the Breeders' Cup Sprint, a race we used the breakout for. And it might be tempting to look at the big figure he ran and say maybe that race was faster and shouldn't be broken out. But so far, at least to me, the evidence doesn't really point to that. He's not the first horse to run back. He's actually the third. Two were in this race, Three Technique the other. But Hoist the Gold took advantage of the circumstances. The other horses to run back, the Chosen Vron and Three Technique, basically they improved their figures a little bit, but they also ran much better races, I would say, finishing much closer.
And the connections of Hoist the Gold are now talking about going over to Saudi Arabia for the Saudi Cup in February, going 9 furlongs. Good luck to them. I'm not convinced that this horse really wants to go beyond 7 furlongs. I think he just found a favorable circumstance last Saturday at Aqueduct. We'll see if he turns out to truly be that kind of horse moving forward.
Yeah, if he was going to take a shot in a 9 furlong race, you might want to look at the Pegasus, which was not coming up very strong. But I tend to agree with you. I don't think that would be a good distance for him, no matter what the competition was.
Well, Craig, I always find some of the most exciting races on this Cigar Mile Day card to be the two-year-old graded stakes events, the Remsen and the Demoiselle. And the Remsen in particular lived up to the hype this year, as we had some talent and potential seemingly coming into this race. And I think we saw a couple, or maybe even more than a couple, really nice horses coming out of this Remsen. An exciting finish between Dornoch and Sierra Leone. An unusual situation where a closer just blows past the leader and that leader comes back for the victory. You don't often see horses regather their momentum the way that Dornoch was able to in the final furlong of this race. But this is one that I was kind of discussing a little bit with regard to pace and how some people might be upgrading the runner-up in this race a little too much, because this was a pretty honest pace, fast pace, actually, when you look at just the half-mile fraction color-coded in red, especially considering that these are 2-year-olds, and it's really tough for 2-year-olds to sustain a fast pace going 9 furlongs. And when you I know, yeah, Dornoch rode the rail throughout, and I think you have to be upfront about the fact that that was a real advantage to him. But the other horses that were anywhere close to that pace or contesting that pace finished absolutely nowhere. So it's kind of an interesting discussion as to who really ran the better race between Dornoch and that runner-up Sierra Leone.
For sure, this is really a handicapping puzzle going forward. You have to decide what you want to do with these horses and how you feel about their races. I think all of probably the top three ran well. Maybe even the fourth place finisher, Moonlight, wasn't terrible given how the track played. Quite the interesting stretch drive. I know it looked like Dornoch really dug in and came back, but some of that has to be just Sierra Leone just wasn't running straight. Jockey Jose Ortiz just couldn't keep him from lugging in, and that really slowed his momentum. And that had to be just a terrible beat if you bet on the 7. I mean, with a furlong to go, it looked like he was going to cruise right by and probably win by a length, maybe 2 lengths, and he just couldn't do it. And even watching the head on, it was interesting. I was trying to see what happened with Dornoch, and I'm still not sure if he hit the rail or not because he was getting in a little bit himself. Some of the antics we've seen from him where he's still a little bit green, but whatever happened in there, he definitely slowed his momentum. So I think that was more where he dug in and was able to get back up to speed and overtake Sierra Leone. But it's a race worth watching a few times, and it's one at this point. If they were to match up again, I'm not sure which way I'd want to go.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with the narrative that seems to be prevailing about this race, which is that Sierra Leone pulled himself up and lost the race. I personally didn't see that. This horse, he was lugging in a little bit, and he is a horse that lugged in a little bit in his debut, and I think that's just his style. That when he's making that big run, he just drifts down towards the rail. But I mean, he had his ears pinned back. He was running through the wire, and not so for Dornoch, who, like you said, he did hit the rail. I mean, you can watch the head on, and he brushes against the rail for a couple of strides. And I think that was actually what got him to finally change leads, because it looked like he wanted to hang on his left lead once again. And once he bumped into the rail, he kind of had to switch over to his right lead to change direction, not to go over it. And Luis Saez all over this horse, just trying to keep him focused and get him re-engaged. And I pulled up the GMAX chart for this race because I think it is instructive, and it kind of validates what I'm saying, in that Dornoch really did re-rally for this victory, because rarely at the end of a 1.125 mile dirt race, especially for the 2-year-olds, do you see a horse getting faster as the race goes on. But when you look at Dornoch's final 3/16 of a mile in GMAX, he runs his final 16th splits in 6.64, 6.47, and then 6.41 for the final one. This is a horse that really did lose his momentum at about the 3/16 pole, and then gather that momentum to increase his speed to run by Sierra Leone at the very end of this race. And I mean, you can just see it comparing the way Dornoch runs to the way that everybody else manages this stretch drive. I mean, basically the whole field was within about 5 lengths of him with 1/8 of a mile to go, and Sierra Leone, I mean, he obviously had built up momentum at the quarter pole to be rolling down the center of the track and on past and continue opening up on the field. But Dornoch was sort of running at the same speed as everybody else. And once he sees Sierra Leone, he just digs in, finds more speed, and puts about 10 lengths between himself and other horses who were going at the same speed as him from the 8th pole to the wire. So, I mean, a rare trait to see a horse actually regain momentum that he had lost at the end of a 9-furlong race to win like he did. I want to give Dornoch a lot of credit for that kind of performance. Yes, he rode the rail. He was with the bias. He was speed of the race, and speed was holding on Saturday. But I still think he showed some really likable attributes in this race. All of that said, you do want to see him start to get over these goofy tendencies at some point.
Yeah, for sure. It was the one thing we mentioned when we talked about this race, that it's a little troublesome that he's goofy, but we did say if he puts it all together, he's going to be a handful. And he did prove to be that on Saturday. So I don't think I mentioned he wound up with a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure, a 1:12 for Sierra Leone. So good, solid performance from the two. if you had to say who had the worst trip, I would say it was the horse you picked, who I thought ran a good race in Drum Roll Please. And he just basically had no chance with that trip. He was wide pretty much every step of the way, lost ground on both turns, and he wasn't making up any ground on the two at the end. I mean, he was actually losing ground to them, but he had every right to be after the early trip.
Yeah, nobody's talking about drumroll, please. But I mean, you could make the argument that he ran just as well as the winner, just as well as anybody in this race when you consider that trip that he got. He was not that far off the pace, unlike Sierra Leone. I know he was seventh through the early stages, but the top 7 or 8 runners were really well bunched through the first 7 furlongs of this race. And drumroll, please. Javier Castellano was trying to save some ground with him, but he never could get over to the inside. He was just visibly not comfortable with the kickback moving down the backstretch, and Javier elected to go 4 to 5 wide with him around the far turn. And when you watch the head on of this race, he is legitimately all by himself out in the 5 path, maybe the 6th path, all the way around the far turn. That was a trip that just was not working for anybody on this Saturday card at Aqueduct. And he still was able to run on and was trying to fight back between horses. Lost a little momentum when Sierra Leone crossed over in front of him, but he finished off this race, got the 9 furlongs to finish third. This is a really good horse, and he's another one that's sort of figuring things out race by race, and I think we're going to hear some things from him next year. We didn't spend too much time on Sierra Leone, Craig. I think it's fairly obvious. He ran a really nice race for a horse in just the second start of his career. That move that he made from the 3/8 pole to the 8th pole was seriously impressive. To go from last to first in that span of time, the way that he traveled into the race was really impressive, but it was kind of like he was running in his own race, isolated from the other horses, because nobody else took as far off the pace as Jose Ortiz did with this horse. He was sort of even behind all the kickback that was falling in front of him from those first 9 runners that sort of ran off from him in the early stages. So he was sort of more with the pace than anybody else in this race, but still a really impressive effort from a horse in just the second start of his career.
It was, and being so far back, he was able to save a lot of ground early, but he did have to swing wide to pass all those horses. So that was quite the impressive run. I think he mentioned he ran a 1:12, so he jumped up 20 points on TimeformUS, and certainly a 2-year-old that has a bright future.
Now, as for the female edition of this race, the Grade 2 Demoiselle, a fairly logical result here as Life Talk was just able to dominate on the front end. I think that some of us were expecting some other horses to try to show a little more speed. They did not, and they just sort of let this favorite get to the lead. And you could basically tell within the first quarter to a half mile of this race that it was going to be really tough to beat Life Talk from the position that she was allowed to attain. And the pace of this race, much more moderate and measured than it was in the Remsen, and they just couldn't catch her in the lane.
Right. By this point, we knew what the track was, and it was pretty obvious early that she was going to win. I mean, she was getting token pressure from most of all, but not enough that you ever thought she was in danger. And once they started going into that second turn, it was all but over. She wound up with a 104 TimeformUS speed figure, so makes a step forward, but still a pretty big gap between the fillies and the colts.
As one of the first runbacks from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, I mean, it's at least encouraging to see a positive effort from the 4th place finisher in that race. I'm not going to say that she really flatters, just FYI, because she just had all the best of it in winning this race, and she only improved her speed figure by 6 points from her Breeders' Cup. But still, she got the 9 furlongs, all positive things for Life Talk. I'm not sure what this race really means in the grand scheme of things as far as her chances to take that next step forward next year. As for some others in here, Craig, Shimmering Allure, I thought, ran pretty well because she did not get the right trip over this track. It's not like she was that far back in the early stages, but she was towards the outside the entire way, tried to make a wide run around the far turn, and she stayed on decently enough for second.
Yeah, she ran just fine in here. Good effort from her. She wound up with 100 TimeformUS speed figure. So small step forward. Same figure that the 3rd place finisher Dolomite got. They were only a length apart at the finish. So it's a good race. But yeah, I would hope that these horses will continue to move forward because speed figure wise, it's just nothing to get excited about yet.
Yeah, and this race did go 4/5 of a second slower than the Remsen, and that speed figure for the Remsen is even higher because that race got more of a pace upgrade than Life Talk did, who actually didn't get any pace upgrade at all for setting her fairly moderate fractions in this Demoiselle. The other graded stakes on this Aqueduct Saturday card was the grade 3 Go for Wand for the fillies and mares, going the mile distance, the same distance as the Cigar Mile. And not the strongest race in this division, to say the least, Craig. I think there were a lot of no-shows in here, but the one that did show up was the winner, Dr. B, who got a savvy ride from Jose Lezcano, who seemed to be really in tune to the racetrack on Saturday, really from an early point in the day. And he hustled this horse to the lead, and it was over from there.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I know this was a horse we both liked when we did our race preview for this one. She didn't particularly run very fast. I was a little surprised by that. It was a race I almost used the breakout because the figures just didn't, they looked low for the field, but the track was really consistent all day. So I just would have had an issue breaking this one out. It's one I will keep an eye on. She only got a 109 TimeformUS speed figure, which seems low given how she was with the track, kind of blew the field away. But when I look at the TimeformUS chart, it's almost just like Tizzy in the Sky just didn't really run a race. And you could see it looked to me like she was really struggling with the track. Somehow she was able to, I guess, just being more inside than the others. She kind of found her stride and was able to get back up for second. But I have no problem with her regressing because I don't think she ran anywhere near as well as she had in the last two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this race is more about those that didn't run the races as those that did. I mean, the two Chad Brown horses, Good Sam and Gerrymander, they both never saw the inside. Good Sam was just hung out wide the entire way. So that's obviously the excuse for her. Never are we going to be that surprised when Gerrymander disappoints because she's just not a horse that seems to have the heart to try to find the winner's circle too much. So Dr. B was able to flick her away. And the fact that Tizzy in the Sky, who really never looked like she was handling the track or running, was able to come back for second in this race, being a horse that typically can only run when she has the lead, I think that says a lot about the horse that finished behind her, just not really showing up with their top effort. So I've got no problem with this race getting a lower speed figure than you might expect. Let's move on to a race that occurred early in this Cigar Mile Saturday card, one that got a lot of people talking from the beginning of the day, and that was the debut victory by El Capi in the second race. This Rick Dutrow first-time starter just rocketed out of the gate from the rail, opened up 4 lengths on the field within about the first furlong, and just never looked back. Kept extending his margin throughout. It looked like there were some first-time starters behind him that actually were live and running, but I mean, they were well beaten by this horse who really relished the going and might have quite a bit of ability, but I think there still are some questions that this guy has to answer based on how he won and the kind of track that he was competing over.
Yeah, even by this time early in the day, we kind of had an idea of how the track was playing. The first race had an easy wire-to-wire winner. El Capi obviously just demolished the field, running a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. So he's one. He's obviously got some real talent. I think this is a horse you picked on top. Congrats if I'm correct in my memory. Long weekend this weekend, but yeah, it was a big effort from El Capi. I think the speed figure is legit. It certainly fit in with the rest of the day, and it's just one I think you have to be a little bit skeptical of, given the track condition and the way the track was playing. He's a horse I would think is probably going to have a little bit of an overblown reputation, and I might be looking at a couple of the others that you mentioned that were in behind him, and Hop Sing and Conquest Warrior, as horses who I would definitely expect to move forward off of this effort. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from the winner. He could very well be just an extremely good horse. I just think as a bettor, it's one that you need to be a little bit skeptical of.
I think the natural comparison that a lot of people were bringing up after this race was Hidden Scroll, who, what was it, probably 5 years ago at this point. I think that was when we first started doing the Pacecast. I remember us discussing that race in one of our first episodes, when Hidden Scroll just ran off from a field on debut, going a mile at Gulfstream with a gigantic speed figure. And I think there's some debate about whether he ever ran back to that kind of race. His Fountain of Youth next time out was probably better than the result indicates, but obviously he did ultimately turn out to be a disappointment. El Capi, I think it remains to be seen what kind of horse he really is. I did pick him in this race. It's not like I had some sort of inside knowledge into him. Really, I just watched his OBS sales workout and was really impressed by it. You can go watch it for yourself. I think he went 10 flat. And for a horse that really does not have a ton of pedigree, I mean, he's by McLean's music, but on the dam side, there's just nothing going on. For him to sell for 220,000, I mean, it kind of says that was an impressive workout. And when you go and watch it, I mean, the thing that stuck out to me and the reason I picked him is because it's just his way of moving. He's got this nice extension to his stride. I mean, he's just a horse that when I watched that work was like, wow, this is an athlete. Not expecting him to win the way that he did, clearly. And the gate speed that he was able to display and the confidence that Jose Gomez used from the outset to know that he could open up on this field and potentially keep going. Maybe he was a little caught off guard by just how alert this horse was right from the start to open up on this field. Really impressive effort. Are we going to see him repeat the 120 TimeformUS speed figure in his next start on a fair track? I would guess probably not, but this might turn out to be a horse that's pretty good. We'll see. As for those that finished in behind him, interesting trip for the runner-up Hop Sing. He was sort of a little awkward out of the gate, was outrun early. Luis Saez made this decisive move from going about 5 wide at the half-mile pole to go down to the rail for the run around the far turn, and I think that benefited him. Conquest Warrior, a really well-bred horse that probably will do better for this start for trainer Shug McGahee. And note that those second and third place finishers were nearly 8 lengths clear from the rest, including a horse, Ignite the Light, who had shown some ability in his first couple of starts. So there is some evidence that this was a pretty strong race. It just remains to be seen whether El Capi can do it again. Another race from Aqueduct last week that was won by a Rick Dutrow trainee in impressive fashion was a Thursday allowance race where Guanare, who actually goes out for the exact same owner and trainer combination as El Capi, won a starter allowance race in pretty impressive fashion. Don't know where this came from, Craig, and obviously the speed figure not quite as high as what El Capi got, but still a nice speed figure for a 2-year-old, and he beat a Brad Cox run that looked pretty well meant, one that was coming out of an extremely live race at Churchill Downs, and another race that had some big gaps between the second and third place finishers, so kind of indicative of a race that should earn a high speed figure, but we're just seeing a lot of these Rick Dutrow horses really show up with career best efforts.
Yeah, Guanare ran a huge race, just demolishing the field. He got a 104 TimeformUS speed figure. The final time was actually 107. The pace was on the slow side, but it's not like he was setting it. He was sitting back in third behind a couple horses who were, I won't say dueling on the lead because they weren't going very fast, but were running next to each other. And once he decided to engage, I mean, the race was basically over. We don't often talk about races at this kind of class level. I mean, he came out of a maiden claimer. I think this was a starter allowance for maybe horses that had only won a maiden claiming race or an optional claimer. So it's hard to say what the competition was, but as you said, the runner-up, Iridescent, had run a nice race last time at Churchill, and it's just one of those where maybe this horse was misjudged early because he's certainly very good right now, and I would imagine we're going to see him in allowance races and maybe even a stakes next time out.
Yeah, I was debating whether or not to put this race on the rundown, but it came up faster than some stakes races that were run in Florida this week for the 2-year-olds. If this had been a maiden race, we'd probably talk about it, given the kind of speed figure that it earned. So big effort from this horse, just not sure where it came from based on his prior efforts. And believe me, I thought his maiden win was actually pretty good for the level, but it was a much lower level than what he was able to attain on Thursday of this past week. And then, Craig, we'll continue with the theme of these big efforts over wet tracks, and we talk about our final race from Aqueduct this past week, and that was a Sunday allowance race that was won by the 3-year-old Mama's Gold. And I've got to be honest. I think we talked about this horse all the way back at the beginning of the year when he won his maiden in a $25,000 maiden claimer by, I think it was 21 lengths. I'm sure you remember that, Craig. He was a horse that was claimed away from Mike Maker that day and picked up by Chad Summers. And I think we kind of both agreed we'll probably never see this horse run back to that kind of race again because it was achieved over a biased surface against much weaker competition, and clearly a horse that had some physical issues to be dropped in for that tag so hastily. But lo and behold, in the fall of his 3-year-old season, Mama's Gold is putting things together race by race, and this was his 3rd victory in a row, moving up in class each time. The issue is all 3 of these recent victories have been earned over sloppy, sealed racetracks, which he obviously loves, and this one definitely worked in his favor.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he won by well over a dozen lengths, ran a 118 TimeformUS speed figure. So he did finally get back to that big number we saw when he broke his maiden. He still is just a 3-year-old, but I tend to be on the side that for whatever reason, he just really likes these sealed tracks. And maybe it's something just to store away when he catches these conditions again, because you never know when it's going to be. And it could drop off his PPs before we see it again. But he is a totally different horse when he gets that situation. I noticed I didn't watch a lot of the racing on Sunday from Aqueduct. I checked in later for Del Mar. We don't have it coded in red. I'm curious, do you think the track was like Saturday or was it more of a fair surface?
Yeah, to me, Sunday was a tough day to read. There were a couple horses in actually the races surrounding this romp by Mama's Gold that made last to first moves on the outside. So, one of those was a favorite. The other was sort of in a fairly wide open race. So it's a little hard to know if the track was biased on Sunday. I mean, it did feel in certain races, especially some of the earlier one-turn races, that speed was not coming back and there wasn't a whole lot of movement of position even in some fast-paced situations. The rail probably was not the same advantage that it was on Saturday. So I think that there were some of the same trends going on, but they just were not nearly as pronounced, and there was rain continuing to fall throughout the day on Sunday. So it could just be one of those days, one of those wet track days where the track was changing from race to race. And that's something that we often see on days where there's just consistent rainfall throughout the day. So it's probably not a day where you want to draw too many hard conclusions about the way that the track was playing based on any one performance. Let's move on to Del Mar, and we'll discuss some of the stakes action from that venue on Saturday and Sunday. Like I said at the top, 2 Grade 1 races on the turf. We saw Chad Brown domination really in both of them, but especially so in the Grade 1 Matriarch, the feature on Sunday. And people complain about Chad Brown running multiple horses in a race, Craig, and some say they want them to be coupled entries. I think those people are absolutely out of their minds. But you could have had this Chad Brown superfecta. I think the odds that it went off at based on the payout were over 1,000 to 1 the way that it came in. So maybe it's not that easy. And Chad Brown did send out the first 4 finishers in this race, and it was not the favorite, White Beam. She actually finished 4th of that trio. But the 3-year-old filly, Surge Capacity, who has just been improving race by race. I mean, showed ability right from the start of her career at Monmouth, but has come to hand very quickly and got one of the better rides of the year from Joel Rosario.
He did, and he needed it because I think it was the real difference, saving all the ground and getting through on the inside. Made a huge difference. And I really thought it was interesting when I saw the PPs for this race that Chad Brown sent the 3-year-old out. We don't often see that, even this late in the year on turf, to take on older horses, but I don't have the exact speed figure. I'll have that later today or tonight, but it looks like she took another step forward, is probably going to get around a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. So this is a horse that with a really promising future. I think she's good. I like how she showed the ability to come through on the inside. Not something you often see from a lately raced horse, but she's got some real quality, and it's not like she didn't beat anything. There were the other Chad Brown horses. There was Queen Goddess, who we saw earlier in the year. She's just now getting back to the races, but she had a good return on, I think that was Breeders' Cup weekend when she ran, but she was a horse that won the Pegasus Filly and Mare Turf last year. So good solid field, and the 3-year-old was able to take it down, but it was largely due to Joel Rosario.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. She got a fantastic trip. It was a very similar situation to what occurred in the Valley View in her prior race, but whereas in the Valley View, Rosario tried to go inside and sort of had to alter course around a horse and had to steady a little bit, and Surge Capacity was able to produce a kick that was able to get up anyway against a slightly weaker field. I think the key part of the Matriarch was that he was able to get her in that spot and then could wait. He didn't have to steady, and then once that gap opened up on the inside, he was able to come on through and just get up over Fluffy Socks, or stablemate. And boy, how about this dam? A Surge Capacity strong incentive. This horse is a homebred for Clarvidge Stables, and Clarvidge Stables, I mean, they don't breed very many horses at all. I don't think they have that many brood mares, but this damn strong incentive. I mean, I think the last 3 foals that she's thrown, you've got Highly Motivated, who just barely lost the Bluegrass to Essential Quality a few years ago, Surge Capacity, who's now a Grade 1 winner, and then her most recent foal is Ways and Means, who was that impressive debut winner at Saratoga, barely lost the Spinaway. I mean, those are, I think she's only had 3 or 4 foals to race, and those are 3 really good horses. So just kind of funny for an operation that really isn't known as being a breeding outfit, having a broodmare like that, just throws nothing but runners.
Yeah,
Fluffy, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't see many broodmares, but they that have that kind of performance. But when they do, it really sticks out. And I'll let you go on with Fluffy Socks, because that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to give a shout out to Fluffy Socks, because there's an argument that she ran the best race here. I mean, not that Irad Ortiz gave a bad ride. I think he just gave the ride that he had to give for a horse like Fluffy Socks, who doesn't have much early speed. And he tried to go around the field and just ended up covering a lot more ground than the winner did, but got there to finish on the wire with her. Looked like a winner at the 16th pole, but ground loss really made the difference.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing her next year. I think she probably did run the best race given the trip she had. She didn't have a lot of choice, as you said, with Irad Ortiz. He just, from the 10 hole, there wasn't a whole lot he could do. Got cover when he could, but lost some ground. But yeah, she's just a really cool mare that I hope we get to see her race at 6. I would assume we're going to, because she just gives it her best every time.
Yeah, I think these first 2 finishers might be the best progeny of each of their sires. Slumber, who has basically no progeny, Fluffy Socks being one of very few, and then the winner, who's by Flintshire, who, I mean, I think it just shows how strong that dam is, because I can't recall seeing too many very good Flintshires out there. Just not a sire that's had a whole lot of success. But those 2 are good ones. Book Cachet, who was 3rd for Chad Brown, had to pause a little bit in upper stretch, came running late. The big disappointment is White Beam, who just has not been able to recapture that magic that she found in the Diana over the summer. In 2 subsequent starts, was a little unprofessional in the First Lady, and then here, I mean, got a good trip sitting on top of the pace, but just didn't have too much to offer through the stretch. Let's move on to the Grade 1 Hollywood Derby, which was the feature on the Saturday card at Del Mar, and another Chad Brown Grade 1 win here, another victory for Clarvidge Stables as Program Trading got the job done over main rival Webslinger, beating that horse for the 2nd time in a Grade 1 race this season. They were 1st and 2nd in the Saratoga Derby earlier this year, and same result in the Hollywood Derby out west. Program Trading just has a little bit more turn of foot than Webslinger and was able to get the jump on him, and I think that made the difference in the end.
And this is one that's not in the charts as we record this, but he actually ran a 1:23 TimeformUS speed figure. I'm uploading that this morning, and just a really good effort from him. We've seen the 3-year-olds be strong all year, and no difference here. Program Trading is just a really good 3-year-old who I think is going to prove to be one of the top horses that we see next year, even with a bunch of strong 3-year-olds moving on. He's just that good. I really like what I see from him.
And not that the horse needed it, but I guess you could say this for Sold Flatter's Integration, who is the only horse to have defeated Program Trading, doing so in the Virginia Derby. And when you go back and watch that race and then appreciate Program Trading's other races, it's pretty impressive that Integration was just able to run right over the top of that horse to win by, I think it was a length or a length and a half in that Virginia Derby. So, we saw what Integration could do in that Hill Prince, and I think all of the horses in this Hollywood Derby were quite satisfied that Shug McGahee decided to set his sights a little bit lower and pick up that grade 2, and instead of trying for the grade 1 at Del Mar this past weekend.
Yeah, this is a weekend that used to be the Hollywood Turf Festival, and pretty soon they're going to have to rename it the Chad Brown Turf Festival, because just every single year he sends horses out and he pretty much dominates. So he knows who to send out and win these races.
There were 3 other turf stakes this past weekend at Del Mar. We can kind of zip through them, Craig. None of them got gigantic speed figures for the level. I guess the one for older horses did, but we can talk about that in a little bit. First up, let's mention the grade 3 Cecil B. DeMille and the grade 3 Jimmy Durante for the males and females, 2-year-olds, run on Saturday and Sunday. In the Cecil B. DeMille, we saw Stay Hot coming out of the Breeders' Cup get the job done. I don't think either of these races had stellar quality in terms of being the best horses in this division. And I think we kind of see that with Stay Hot, who was sort of a non-threatening 10th in the Breeders' Cup and comes back and wins this race and wasn't done any favors by the trip, because this horse didn't have any opportunity to save ground around either turn.
No, I mean, it was an honest win for her. I think she was much the best in here. I took my best swing at the speed figure. I think she's going to get about a 97, which is actually a slight decrease from her 10th place finish in the Breeders' Cup. But I think the trip probably explains that a little bit. As you said, she lost ground every step of the way. But this race, it's just okay. It's nothing I'm going to get too excited about, much like the Jimmy Durante that we'll talk about next.
Yeah, and I think I threw you off a little bit, Craig. Stay Hot is the male horse, so he was the one that made the run from off the pace. And yeah, I agree. He was much the best here. I mean, going wide around the turns, he had to swing about 5 to 6 wide coming off the far turn to make that run. But just not really sure what was in behind him in this race, and did what he had to do to beat a softer field than he was in last time. And then as for the fillies and the Jimmy Durante, won by Zona Verde, I think this one's going to get a slightly higher speed figure. Very good ride from Juan Hernandez, who was aggressive from an outside post position and was able to get this horse over to the inside, which probably made the difference.
Yeah, this was a race. I think it had 3 Phil D'Amatos, and this was the other Phil D'Amato. And as you said, the ride made all the difference. When this one is going to get a 101 TimeformUS speed figure. These are the ones I did upload this morning. And yeah, I think this horse actually has some talent. Maybe they found the right tactics to use for this filly here, as she was able to finally to show some speed. She'd been caught in behind in a couple races without much pace in her first 2. So I would hope they keep using these similar tactics going forward.
Then we'll finish off this show by discussing the one other stakes they ran this past weekend at Del Mar on Saturday early in the day. The 5-furlong Stormy Liberal on the turf was won by Unconquerable Keen. And I don't have a whole lot to say about this race, Craig. The pace projector depicted that there wasn't a whole lot of pace in this race going in. We saw it on the racetrack. They just sort of let Unconquerable Keen get to the front end, set some very moderate fractions for the distance, and there was no catching him.
No, there wasn't. I mean, Lane Way's in there, a horse we've talked about before. He's a good, solid runner, but Unconquerable Keen is a horse who, when he gets things his own way, he's tough, and he's in good form right now. And drawing that inside post, he was able to do it. Another Phil D'Amato trainee. He's one that's going to get a nice speed figure for this one, a 121, which I believe is a career best for him. He is just a 4-year-old, so he's a horse with some talent, and I imagine he'll get some chances in some better races going forward.
Yeah, solid effort from him, but he really did have things his own way on the front end. Well, that wraps up our race recap from this past weekend, Craig. Looking ahead, I know Oaklawn is opening up this week, so maybe we'll take a look at a card from there for this upcoming Saturday. I think we'll compare that, Gulfstream, maybe some venues that we haven't looked at in quite a while for the TimeformUS forecast, trying to come up with a sequence for later in the week. Just some housekeeping. Craig and I are planning to take a couple of weeks off towards the end of the year. So I think we're going to keep going with these podcasts through about the middle of December, and then we'll take a bit of a break through the holiday season, and we'll pick up in 2024.
Yeah, I would imagine we're going to be doing some tracks we haven't done in a while going forward as we start to get into the winter season, and we'll be getting good cards from, you mentioned Oaklawn, Fairgrounds, Gulfstream. So going to be a little refreshing. We've been doing the same couple of circuits for a while now, but that'll shift this time of year.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.